Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this panel discussion about environmental defenders in the, I will say, the Soviet successor states, or the former Soviet Union, and the United States. We have different representatives from different organizations, both in the U.S. and in the former Soviet Union. I'm Erica Weinthal. I should not forget to introduce myself. I'm a professor at the Nicholas School of the Environment and also in the School of Public Policy, where I have a secondary appointment, and I am the co-director of the Human Rights Center here at the Franklin Humanities Institute. And one of our core goals, or part of our mission, is really to bring the issue of environmental justice into the world of human rights. So we sponsor a number of events and speakers over the year related to environmental justice, indigenous rights, both in the United States and abroad. I'm going to spend a few minutes introducing the speakers rather than introducing every speaker before they speak. So after I finish introducing, I will turn it over and let our panel go through their different presentations, and then we will open it up for Q&A and a discussion. So this event is really special because we have Kate Waters here from Crude Accountability, who we've had come to Duke several times over the last decade to speak about their work working on environmental justice and protecting the environment in the Caspian region. Crude Accountability is really one of the most important, I would say, organizations working in the Caspian and working with environmental defenders in the former Soviet space. They've done a lot to work with local communities that have experienced environmental contamination from the oil and gas industry. And they've also worked on anti-corruption activities with partners. They've tried to hold governments accountable and multinational companies accountable for their work. So Kate Waters is the co-founder and the executive director of Crude Accountability. And she has, I guess, led the organization, helped create it since 2003. Kate has been working in this space of environmental activism for decades. She has, many years ago, she ran a center at Duke, so she has deep roots here, which is not on her official bio, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is almost, coming home in some ways. She has worked extensively with environmental activists throughout the former Soviet Union, starting since the 1990s. She speaks fluent Russian. She has published numerous articles on civil society and the environmental movement in Central Asia and the Caspian. She has a master's in Russian area studies from Georgetown. And I'm going to, I guess, try to go in the order of the presentation. Elena is next after this, who also works with Crude Accountability, who is Elena Sorokina. She's a communications manager. She has a master's in media studies from Syracuse, where she received a scholarship for contribution to free speech in the First Amendment program. She has also served at the Tully Center for Free Speech and the Newhouse School for Public Communications. Before that, she has a degree in journalism from Moscow State University. Then we are turning to Gubad. Dr. Gubad Ibadoglu, who is an economist and an anti-corruption activist. He is currently a visiting scholar at the Center for European, yes, at Rutgers University, okay. And before that, he was a senior policy analyst for social and economic studies at Azerbaijan's Economic Research Center. And he has been studying the politics of natural resources and revenue management for many years. I should note that at one point he was it was a Fulbright scholar here, right? Fulbright at Duke University with Charlie Becker, who's here in the Department of Economics, which is wonderful. He has also worked extensively with civil society and as a representative working with civil society on the International Board of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative in Azerbaijan. After that, we'll have Sergei Solyanik, who is an environmental defender. And again, I just want to note, we're delighted to have environmental defenders from the region, and they will all talk about their work and some of the reprisals and dangers they experience working in this space. Sergei is really at the forefront of much of this work. He's been an active participant in Kazakhstan's environmental movement since the 1990s. He earlier worked with Green Salvation, which was one of the most important NGOs in Kazakhstan. He has a degree in electrical engineering and a master's in environmental politics from Kiel University in the UK. And he is currently working with Crude Accountability in Kazakhstan. And lastly, we will turn to Vadim Ni, who is an environmental lawyer from Kazakhstan who will try to make sense of all the other presentations and bring it all together for us. He is the director of the EcoForum of NGOs in Kazakhstan. He has worked in the environmental field for several decades. He's straddles the ability to work with government, with international organizations. He's helped draft some of the most important environmental legislation in Kazakhstan. In 2014, he was elected to be chair of the EcoForum of NGOs in Kazakhstan, which is the national network of NGOs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Thank you all very, very much for being here. It's really a pleasure to see so many people interested in environmental work, interested in human rights, and interested specifically in that intersection. We're going to talk to you today, as Erica said, about environmental defenders and about environmental work, not only in the former Soviet space, but a little bit also here in the United States. We had hoped to have an environmental defender from Pennsylvania with us, but unfortunately he was not able to join us today. So I'm going to talk briefly about the situation in the U.S. because I think it's relevant for your institute, also for all of us. Environmentalism is global, and the threats that we're facing are global as well. I want to spend just a couple of minutes before I turn over really the details to my colleagues, explaining to you what this project is and why we thought it was an important thing to do. So we've produced this report called Dangerous Work, and there are hard copies up here at the front of the room for anybody who's interested in having a hard copy. It's also available online on our website. But we had noticed over the course really of the past 5 years that the situation for environmental defenders with whom we've been working for many, many years has been getting increasingly worse. According to one of our colleagues, some of the defenders who we work with spend up to 70% of their time simply holding the authorities or the corporations at bay, dealing with the various types of struggles that are put up in front of them, never mind getting to the environmental work itself. And so we decided in 2017 to produce the first version of this report, which we did. And sadly, 2 years later, it was already time to update the report because the number of incidences of reprisals against defenders around the world has only been increased. And we decided in this volume to include the United States more prominently. We had included a couple of cases in our previous report, but we have noticed, sadly, over the course of the last couple of years, really starting in November of 2016, that the situation for environmental defenders in this country has become much, much worse. And so we thought it was important for us to include that in the report as well, since part of what we're talking about really here is trends in reprisals. So I want to talk about 4 basic major trends of reprisal that we have documented in our report. My colleagues are going to talk much more specifically about what that means in terms of their own activism and their own work. And I'm going to very briefly touch on 2 cases from the United States just to give an example of what's happening here. But regardless of what country we're talking about, we see 4 major areas where environmental defenders are really under increasing pressure now, especially compared with sort of 10 years ago. And Liana's going to speak much more specifically about that. One of the areas we see is the creation of legislation that shrinks the space for civil society overall. And that includes for environmental defenders. And when I say civil society, I hope you all know I mean non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations, individuals who are working on social issues in their communities, other more traditional organizational forms in villages and in small communities where people organize themselves. So we're not just talking about, sort of non-governmental organizations in the kind of traditional way, but really all of the ways that people organize themselves in their communities to take care of themselves and to represent themselves. So we see really sort of restrictions in the legal environment that are set up in order to make it harder to be a civil society organization or to be an individual working on environmental protection. The second thing we see is the use of already existing laws to really pressure civil society activists wherever they are. So the use of administrative legislation, the use of criminal legislation to hold them down, that really creates an environment in which it is hard to operate. The third thing that we see a lot of is smear campaigns and character defamation and character assassination. A lot of that is taking place in the media, obviously, and in social media. And one of the things that's really important to acknowledge with the defamation and the character smearing that happens in social media is that it isn't limited to just a specific community or a specific country. When you're slammed on social media, you're slammed all over the world. And this has become a really sort of disgusting tool that both authorities and corporations are using to really put into question the character of many environmental defenders who are challenging them. And then the final trend that we see, which is sadly growing tremendously, is the use of violence against environmental defenders. Some of you may have read the Global Witness report on environmental defenders, which has been tracking actually deaths among defenders. The most recent update of that report was done in July of this year. And in 2018, 164 environmental defenders lost their lives doing their work. They didn't just die. This is documented in relation to their work. In 2017 was the grisliest, the deadliest year on record for environmental defenders. 207 defenders lost their lives around the world. So we, in our report, are not focusing only on death. We're focusing on these other ways that governments, corporations, the thugs who they hire are coming after environmental defenders. And so this is kind of what the topic of our report is. Not very cheery, but we think really important to document. We all know, and you as scholars know, if it isn't written down, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So we really feel an urgency to put this down on paper. I want to switch very quickly to 2 of the cases in the United States. And before I do that, I want to focus or provide a little bit of context for the U.S. cases. In both the former Soviet space and in the United States, we see a combination of pressure that's coming from government bodies and coming from corporations. In the United States, a lot of the direct threat that defenders are facing is really coming from companies, with complicity often from government bodies or with sort of turning away and not noticing. But it's much more common in the United States to be threatened by a corporation than it is by government. Having said that, one of the laws that's on the books that has been most onerous for environmental defenders has to do with eminent domain. And if you're not familiar with eminent domain, I'm not going to give a lecture on it, but basically the idea is if you own a piece of property and the it's decided that your property should be used for the greater good of the country or the greater economic benefit of the country, corporations can come in and use your land through eminent domain. Oftentimes they try to purchase that land from you or rent that land from you, but if you say no, they're going to come in with using eminent domain and they're going to use your property whether you like it or not, and this is legally allowable. So that's one of the legal rules, or one of the laws that is really offensive and really difficult for environmental defenders. The second is that there's a lot of legislation on the books over the past couple of years which is trying to criminalize specifically pipeline protests. So in the wake of Standing Rock and all of the pipeline protests that have taken place after that, rather than being a misdemeanor, rather than being you're arrested for whatever reason, it is on the books in a number of states, and there have been 17 states in the country where they're trying to pass new laws that say that if you block the construction of a pipeline, this is a criminal offense. And the current administration is trying to pass legislation that says that if you were to block the construction of a pipeline, impede the process and the progress of a pipeline, it's a felony offense with up to 20 years in prison. And this includes if you stand on your own property and say, you know what, I don't want that pipeline to go through my land, even though you're saying you can have it for eminent domain. So you can be arrested, and there are cases in our report of people who are on their own property trying to block pipeline construction who have served time in prison. One of those people is a woman named Ellen Gerhardt. She lives in Pennsylvania. She's a retired special needs school teacher, and she and her daughter organized tree sits on their property when the Mariner East 2 pipeline was planned to go through their property, and she decided she didn't want the grove of trees on her land to be destroyed. She was arrested and imprisoned. She spent 2 days in solitary confinement for trying to block pipeline construction on her own property. And this is just one of the cases that we have. There's another case that I can just draw your attention to, a different part of the country, but also a pipeline case with a man named Chase Iron Eyes, who is part of lives on the Standing Rock reservation as a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe, who has also been imprisoned, arrested numerous times for his opposition to pipeline construction through Standing Rock. I think many people are familiar with the Standing Rock cases. And in this instance, not only were police involved, but the pipeline company that was building the DAPL pipeline used private security forces from a company called Tiger Swan. Many of them were former mercenaries who are now working inside the United States for Tiger Swan, sort of doing the security work for pipeline companies. So I'm going to stop with that because I think you all have probably much more access to U.S. cases, and you can read about them in our report. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who will talk more about the former Soviet space. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, although I was not a person originally on the program. The activist on the program, Andrei Rudamacha, unfortunately, from Russia, faced an ugly case of pressure and harassment about 2 weeks ago, and he had to change his travel plans. He had to stay home to deal with the situation that he was facing. Just to give you an idea, he was overnight all around his home city. There were posters plastered all around saying that he was a pedophile and giving his house address, his exact home address, so kind of like inviting people to the violence. And This is it is very ugly and it's disgusting, but this is unfortunately what they have to live with. And to give you a little more context, we have a video of their office raid that happened 6 in the morning while people were asleep. There are guns involved here, so just trigger warning. So Kate, can you please play that?
And also,
This is an office/house, so there are people.
and the person
there at
they're
night.
throwing on the ground is Andrei Rublev.
Yeah.
What city is it?
This is
Krasnodar.
Krasnodar. Krasnodar. You might know this region. This is where the Olympic Games 2014 were taking place. We have lots of videos from that police raid, from the security cameras of police opening their door with a chainsaw and things like that. This is just one raid that happened this summer. This year they had 3 raids so far, and this is just how they have to work. So the group I'm talking about is the Environmental Watch on the North Caucasus, one of the oldest Russian environmental organizations. They've been around from 1997, but since 2012, I would say since 2012, this is the period of time until now. This is the period of time where they are facing the most amount of harassment and pressure. And I'm going to explain you why they're not alone in this. It was never very easy to be a civil society and activist in Russia. And in 2012, things took a turn for worse. If you rewind and think about 2011, well, what happened in 2011? We had the Arab Spring, we had Gaddafi gone, we had several other world authoritarian regimes overthrown, going down the drain, and shortly after that, in 2014, we had Ukraine, we had Maidan, the political opposition in Ukraine was starting to build up. That was really concerning for the Russian government. And so they took steps to put more pressure on any kind of civil society. In 2011, we had a few very big protests in Moscow, people on the streets just asking for change, just asking for for something new in politics, for asking the president and the parliament to be more accountable. So that scared the government as well. So the steps they took, I would say 2 of the laws were the most detrimental for the civil society. I'm talking specifically about the law on public association and the law on the foreign agents. So the law on public association basically prohibits any groups or any group of people together and do something in the public space. Technically, you can do that. You can have your protest, your rally, but you have to go through so many bureaucratic hoops, through so many paperwork, and you have to obtain permits. And while you want to follow the rules and go through all this bureaucracy, they can just deny your permit in the end, or just put your protest not in the city center, but like in the suburbs. And for any sort of violation of that law, you can have financial fines, you can be arrested and detained. The second law I will be talking about is the law on foreign agents. So what happened is when you see dissatisfaction in your own people, you don't want to take responsibility for that. You want to blame it on someone else, or external forces, the West, the Americans, or whatever. And so the law on foreign agents says that any sort of non-governmental organization that gets financial resources from abroad and that tries to influence politics, that try to influence democracy, is a foreign agent. So the influence the democracy part is a very loose term. It's not defined in the law. And lots of environmental organizations became foreign agents for trying to influence the democracy. There are no trial process, no court hearings. You're just being thrown on that list. And being on that list of foreign agents, what does it mean? It means huge financial fines for the organizations that are just stifling. They mean increased scrutiny of your paperwork, multiple just raids of the office, and it's basically, if you are a foreign agent, it's very hard for the organizations to be able to function. And smear campaigns too, in the government media, because who likes a foreign agents? No one. So this specific group that I'm talking about, Environmental Watch in the North Caucasus, we registered about 43 cases involving violation of the right to freedom of assembly. And they were on that foreign agent list. They are now taken off the list, but just going on that list and going to court proving you are not an agent takes time. It takes lots of financial resources. And it basically, as Kate said, it's 70% of your work now is just doing this. It's not doing your actual environmental protection. It's just trying to play by the rules, trying to follow all the bureaucratic procedures. These laws were very successful, actually, in terms of stifling civil society. A third of all environmental organizations in Russia, since passing that law, just ceased to be. They decided they can not longer operate at all. And the laws were so successful that other countries like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, they just took that and mirrored the same laws in their countries. So I think I'm going to give the floor to Gubat from Azerbaijan, who can talk more about this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this discussion. Before share my personal case, I want briefly inform you that there is the Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is tiny but very important country for the US and for the Europe due to the location and due to the rich resources. Azerbaijan rich with the oil and the gas resources. At the same time, Azerbaijan also located between Iran and Russia. It's like the sandwich between the Iran and Russia. It's very important strategic position for the US and the Russia, as well the European countries. Why the enabling environment for NGOs became very bad in Azerbaijan? One of the reasons, I think it's the Ukraine Maidan protest. While the events in the Ukraine Maidan protest unfolded in 2014, in that time the president of Azerbaijan was chairing the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. In that time, the authorities of Azerbaijan tightened the operating environment for the NGOs and launched a crackdown on the freedom of NGOs, human rights defenders, and the journalists and their lawyers. Prominent and recognized human rights defenders and journalists were added to ranks of the political prisons. So far, the number of the political prisons in Azerbaijan more than 120 persons. The crackdown on independent civil society organization has had profoundly negative effect to the ability of the NGOs and the civic activists to engage and promote the process of the transparency and accountability and the environmental issues in Azerbaijan. In the case of the many independent civil society organizations, their bank account and even the personal account of senior staff were seized by the court decision adopted without any opportunity for the NGO leaders to defend themselves. Dozens of members of the independent civil society groups were integrated by the prosecutor office, and the criminal case were opened against several NGOs. Under this pressure, sizable numbers of the independent NGOs working on the transparency and accountability, environmental issues were compelled to suspend their activity. One of the victims was my organization, the Economic Research Center, and personally me. First wave of the pressure on me by the Azerbaijan authorities started during the deteriorating the enabling environment of independent civil society organization in 2014. In that time, the government-oriented newspaper and the online resources published defamatory articles about me and others in Russian, in Azeri, and in effort to compromise my reputation by claiming I am foreign agent. It's not only about me, several and the prominent, well-recognized civil society leaders. In 2014, the business account, Economic Research Center, and the personal account of mine was frozen, and I was summoned to the Prosecutor General Office for the questions as a witness in a case of against a number of the local and foreign NGOs. And some of the foreign NGOs was the US-based NGOs. For example, the National Endowment for Democracy and NDI and IRI also was part of the interrogation process by the Prosecutor General's office. Second wave of the pressure on me by authorities, which was connected with my membership of the EITI International Board. I was elected on behalf of the Eurasian Civil Society Organization in 2013. The EITI, this is the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, established in 2002 and is a global standard to promote transparency in extractive industry. And the board of the EITI is made up of the government, private sector, and the civil society representatives, with the primary objective to collect and publish data on countries' revenue from oil and the gas and natural resources, and strengthening the extractive industry governance for the public benefit. Therefore, active involvement of the civil society is a cornerstone of the EITI, and the EITI standard also require equal and effective participation of the civil society. In that time, the civil society situation in my country was deteriorating. That's why I raised the question during my participation in the international board. The situation is going bad. We should make some decision. The EITI made decision to send to Azerbaijan fact-finding mission. And on the basis of the fact-finding mission report, in 2015, in the April, the EITI made decision about the downgraded Azerbaijan status from the compliant to the candidate due to the problems with the civil society participation, because fact-finding report shows that the situation with the civil society, the equal participation and the effective participation in the EITI process was not acceptable. Azerbaijan was one of the leading countries in EITI. Even in 2003, joined EITI, and it was one of the pilot countries, and then Azerbaijan became one of the compliant countries in 2009. But as I said before, due to the situation in the Ukraine, in the Arab Spring, and the government decided to shrinking the civic space in my country and started the harsh crackdown, the civil society. On May 2015, less than a month after the downgraded Azerbaijan membership status in the EITI, then I was traveling to the United States as a Reagan Facile Democracy Fellowship participant. The government increased its harassment of me and my organization. The Economic Research Center was searched by the staff of the prosecutor office, who says the NGO computers and the financial in accounting and the accounting records of the ERC. They confiscate all of the computers, 8 computers and 1 laptop. And in the summer 2016, the equipment was returned, but all the memory and the motherboards were ruined, making the computer unusable. The financial documents were also returned, but in such a mess that the filing system was completely destroyed. I was charged with the abuse of the power, tax evasion, and the illegal business. The authorities claim that the activity of the ERC, Economic Research Center, between 2010 and 2015 was illegal because the organization failed to pay VAT, valued at tax. Also, the civil society organizations are exempt from paying the VAT in Azerbaijan according to the local legislation. Approximately 20 other organizations were included in the criminal case. The government withdrew 8,500 manat, almost $5,000 from the Economic Research Center bank account without any warning, and also the account was unfrozen in March 2016. The money has still not been returned. In March 2017, the EITI board suspended Azerbaijan membership due to the government failed to engage civil society, which is in violation of the EITI requirement to involve a wide range of stakeholders. Following this decision, the government, Azerbaijan, announced its withdrawal from the EITI and then started the first wave of pressure, and in June 2018. In that time, I lost also my protection because the EITI was for me the protection because I was the member of the organization. Azerbaijan left this organization and then started the pressure to my professional, to my the teaching activities. I lost my teaching position at the Azerbaijan State University of Economics as a direct result of the independent civil society work, as a direct result with my position, independent position in the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative International Board. At the time, I was a tenured professor at the university, a position I had held for 21 years. I had received an invitation to participate in the board meeting of the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which I was the board member at that time. During my participation in this meeting, the rector signed the order about my position, and I lost my position at the university. Thanks to Scholar Rescue Fund, I have been accepted the researcher position at the Institute for Advanced Study in the Princeton in September 2017. And then I received the invitation from the Rutgers University. And currently, I am teaching at the Rutgers University in the economic departments, and as well as the political science. I am teaching the economics of the natural resources, economics of the transition, and international political economy. And in last summer, the Rutgers University extended my contract, one more academic year. I returned to my home country for the obtain visa for 2019-2020 academic year. While in Baku, in my capital city, I again faced surveillance. My phone was tapped, and I was the subject of the smear campaign in the government-oriented newspaper. The criminal case which the government opened against me personally and against the organization as an economic research center in 2015 is still open and ongoing. At present, I continue to await the result of the ongoing surveillance, the return to money withdrawn by the state from the organization bank account, and the return of some normalcy in which I could work as a civil society representative, as a professor of the university without fear of reprisal or intimidation. That day seems a long way, as long as international forces and the global community pay little attention to this process. As I said in the beginning of my speech, there is the global and the strategic interest. The countries like the United States and European Union, unfortunately, they put first security, economic interests, and then the support to democracy in my country. Thanks so much for your attention.
Good afternoon to everybody. Once again, I'm Sergey Solyanik. I'm a consultant to Crude Accountability based in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and I'm going to continue the thoughts that Lena raised up about why it's going on, why right now our environmentalists became new dissidents. It is especially true for former Soviet Union countries and so on. First of all, our authoritarian regime who exists right now in Central Asia and Russia, first of all, they're afraid any mobilization of people, including mobilization of people just to protect own environmental rights. And actually, it's visible. There were adopted special articles in our criminal code. And right now, there are very popular two articles. One article devoted to dissemination of false information. And second one is so-called heating social intolerance. And actually, our officials, especially in Kazakhstan, are using these articles just to shut down independent voice of activists, bloggers, journalists, and other active people and so on. And I would like just to be focused on the article devoted to distribution of false information and just to provide a couple cases from our practice. The first case is devoted to independent environmental activists. Actually, he is volunteer. We have in Kazakhstan a very big city, Temirtau. It's a very polluted city because there is huge metal steel plant. And of course, there is huge air pollution and so on. And there is big inactivity of local authority and the plant just to improve the air quality and so on. That is why people just tried to organize and to protect own rights. One of these activists is Svetoslav Wojciechowski and so on. Actually, he is local entrepreneur. And last summer, he decided just to shoot this air pollution and to upload it into the internet. He produced about 20 films, and actually, the back reaction was very huge, especially from local populations. They supported it, and there are a lot of painful questions to local administration, to company, and so on, so on, so on, so on. Of course, company hates it. they tried to shut down it in software just to publish opposite opinion in the internet and so on, but they lost this information campaign. And after that, they decided to organize law case against him for distribution of false information. And unfortunately, there was huge pressure against him, and he couldn't find good lawyer just to protect. And you can imagine how many lawyers, good lawyers, company had against him and so on. And actually, after the several attacks, physical attacks, it was from usually in dark time, from anonymous persons and so on. And there was huge pressure from him, his family, because they were afraid for his future, for future of his life and so on. He was needed to conclude a so-called agreement just to publicly excuse for publishing of this video and so on. And after that, it was shut down. But actually, his wave that we made, in the result, there was the company was fined because it was recognized there is huge air pollution. Moreover, he continued to protect human rights of local people and so on. But that fact that our official used, and together with company, used this article to shut down its fact. Another story is devoted to me, because for 15, 16 years, me, Kato Authors, and Crude Accountability, we conducted public campaign in the Western Kazakhstan to protect people from small villages. The name of this village is Berezovka. It was about 1,000 people. To relocate from dangerous closeness to very dangerous oil and gas field. It's the second oil gas field in condensate field in the world, Karachaganak. There was huge environmental pollution and so on, so on, so on. And there was, these people were relocated couple years ago after a horrible poisoning of local kids. Until now, the company and our officials don't want to recognize responsibility for this poisoning and so on. And through our activity, we not only help people to be relocated, and moreover, we try to help these poisoned kids. Some of them, we collected money and sent to Moscow for independent clinics and so on to get right analysis and so on, so on, so on. And the first signals about there is pressure against us, we got in 2016. We were detained together with Kato Authors during our trip to collect video interviews and so on. But after involvement of our lawyer, local newspaper, we were released. After that, we got information that internet there was published big film, Moscow's Berezovka Democracy. It was made in good Russian propaganda style. It was good, well-done film. The sense of this film, me, Kato Authors, and our local partners works for CIA, and we are trying to organize Orange Revolution in Western Kazakhstan. Very well produced, you can see it, but it's in Russian, and until now it is existing in YouTube. And after that, I got signals from local parents that against me and my colleague, local police collecting information. For what purpose, I don't know. And in this May, it was in 7th May, me together with my wife, we decided to visit this village. People relocated at abandoned places and so on. We just decided to visit this place to make photo and so on, and to see what is going on right now in this place and so on. And we were illegally detained by local police to delivered to local police station in the Aksai city, small city. It's so-called our gas capital in Kazakhstan, Aksai city. And in this police station, I knew, it was really surprising for me, that 2 years ago, there was started criminal case against not only me, but from our campaign to help these poisoned children. And this policeman tried to question me. I denied it. And the second day, I was needed to come back to this police station together with my lawyer. And in the end, I protected myself. There was huge scandal in mass media and so on, because I was so-called prepared for such kind of situation, but it was surprising for me. And also, this case was stopped against me, but this criminal case was not closed. And right now, there is existing hook for anybody, including Kate Lotus. Right now, it will be dangerous for her to visit West Kazakhstan. He could be detained and questioned and so on for such kind distribution of false information. All our false information was about inactivity of local authority and company to help these poisoning children.
Sergey, can I show the video?
Oh, yeah.
This was the false information. It's very short.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, this video was reason to organize criminal case against us. Okay, and I'm giving floor to my colleague Vadim Ni. He will continue what is going on in this activist in Kazakhstan and Central Asia.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to present our cases to you. I hardly can imagine that it will be possible in my country, but not just because it's dangerous, but sometimes less interest from the students or from university teachers to these issues. I would like to say first that what the case is presented to you, it's not about the special circumstances or for the activities of environmental defenders in certain countries. The harassment, persecution, and the penalization of environmental defenders becoming the issue for many countries. When first the idea of the development of such a report came to my mind, I was not aware at all about the similar reports on the Latin America, on Asian countries. It was just the attempt to protect an environmental defender in my country, who was for the first time in the experience of our country was sentenced for 5 years, and I will provide you details that's on what grounds he was sentenced for 5 years. It was just because of in 2011, 2015, the government provided to lease the agricultural lands to foreigners, foreign companies, initially for 10 years, and then it was extended, the term was extended to 25 years. And in 2015, the people started to protest against it, just because it became not just hypothetical leasing of the lands, but there was the idea with China, to cooperate with China, and then the people were concerned that some Chinese agricultural farms are not famous of not sustainable farming, and our excessive use of pesticides in Russia and some neighboring countries. That's why there was a big public concern. And then the guy, our colleagues from Western Kazakhstan, submitted an application for a rally, and then made a statement on his Facebook, and then before getting the permission, he started to discuss with his colleagues the negative impacts of leasing agricultural lands to foreign companies, and foreigners on the basis of the study produced by UN. And but at the end, okay, the concern was growing and expanding in other regions of Kazakhstan, and the people were ready also to go and rally. But the government, and it's normal practice in our country, they never permit any pickets or peaceful assemblies on the streets unless it's about the support of the president or maybe the government. Protests never accepted. And then finally, there was some unsanctioned meeting of the people on the street, and he just came to them to calm down. And then after that, the mayor of that city promised that there will be no punishment. Nevertheless, the next year, he and his colleague were sentenced for 5 years. And that was a long story. He's still in jail, and he treated I will not call it torture, but it's close to torture. And despite of the protest by many international organizations, and he's still there. And that's it's not only the one country when the governments do not accept and permit the rallies and protests against the government. I would provide you another example. That's Poland, and sometimes ago we had the joke with my colleague from Poland that the Poland is probably the homeland of the democracy in the world, because the the parliament, they always were the parliamentarians were very vocal. But what happened there in last year? Every year there are conference of parties of the climate convention, climate agreements. And last year it took place in Katowice. It was for 2 weeks. And of course, the NGOs, some NGOs, were accredited for that meeting. And also they normally, in European at least countries, when European countries host the conference, climate conference, there is also the global action. That's global march to the people, NGOs mostly NGOs that are claiming the more ambitious global action, climate action. And it was the case also with Poland. But what happened there? Before of that, 14 representatives of civil society were denied access to entry to Poland, even though they were accredited and they got visa. And most of them there were from Ukraine, 9 persons, some few persons from Russia, 1 from Georgia, and 1 from Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is our neighboring country. It's very far away from Poland. And for me, it's a big question how the Polish intelligence identified those persons. Whether they have, for me, it's completely laughable that the Polish intelligence is able to surveil the persons in Kyrgyzstan. And even more, the young girl from Kyrgyzstan, she, the same year in June, she for the first time was recognized, let's say, regionally as an environmental activist. She awarded our Youth Environmental Prize, and then because of that recognition of her activity, she was invited to one meeting in Geneva for the first time. And at the end of that year, she was also attended for the global climate conference. And for me, it's I'm sure that there was no any facts that she will able to organize any protest in Poland. She doesn't speak almost the English, and I can imagine that the young Claudia for Kyrgyzstan will be able to organize protests in Poland. It's you would expect that some people, some activists from European countries will organize such protests. But why? I think that in this case, the Poland decided to penalize someone. It was easier to them to penalize the activists from Ukraine, from Kyrgyzstan, from Georgia, because there will be no any protest from their governments. And it is like this, and they do it, and I think it's the one source of case. We discussed that's one source of widespreading pressure on the environmental defenders is the foreign agent law, which is applied in some way or another in other countries, even without the use of the same name. But also, as my colleague Sergey mentioned, that people becoming more and more aware of their environmental rights, and they are becoming to claim for their rights from their government. They are claiming for sustainable development. But what's happening right now, and of course, in some cases, they will protest and they will go on rally. But what is becoming that we don't want that the dispute about our future, about our sustainable future, will be the arena or full of repression, harassment, and yeah, that's because so far that's unlike some human defenders. We acted maybe in some specific cases. Yeah, it was. The activity was at risk, but now it's becoming really a dangerous profession to be an environmental defender. Yeah, thank you.
First, just join me in thanking them, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I want us to have some time to ask questions. So please just raise your hand and just state your name and ask your question. If anyone has a question. Roman.
Thank you so much. I have 3 questions, but probably you don't need to answer them all. And they are to each of participants. My first question is about interplay between national government and local governments, and I'm tracing the situation with the environmental protests in Western Siberia, in Kuzbas region, protests around coal mining. And it seems to me that in that case, local powers play a very important role. And despite the fact that like laws against foreign agents were enacted on federal level, but their implementations differs in different regions, and maybe Elena could say something about about some specific features of Krasnodar region and like how it differs from, for example, Russian North, where like protests around Shias were so much more successful, I would say, and it would be really interesting to me to hear about this dynamic in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan too. I was also wondering about the role of social media and especially YouTube in the local protests, and videos played really important, very important role in your presentations. They really helped us to kind of to grasp the real situation you're describing, and I'm wondering how this struggle between environmentalists and pollutants evolves on YouTube, and how the fact that corporations and the state have much more resources to produce like high quality videos and like fancy TV shows on how it changes the situation. And the third question is about image of like a dangerous foreigner, which seems to be employed on both sides. On the one hand, we have laws against foreign agents, and on the other hand, there is a big grassroots protests in Russia right now against like Chinese companies taking the timber from Siberian woods, and I'm deeply uneasy with this protest because it employs very much of chauvinistic language, and it's kind of a it seems to me there are some problems in this language, and maybe you can comment on this kind of on this image of foreigners and how is it employed on both sides of the struggle. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry for so many questions, but your presentation was so thought-provoking.
Answering to your question, thank you for your question about the role of local administration and so on. Yeah, there is quite difference. I don't comment about Russian situation also. Maybe Lena will comment about our case in Kazakhstan. Yeah, it was clear for us. It was organized local administration because there is so-called joke. Any local administration just dreams to have big polluter in own area because it's good source of money. And all big corporations are communicated and are tied with local administrations, and there is big field for corruption and so on. That is why they support to each other. And if there was so-called order from central bodies, from Astana to punish me, Kate Otter, so on, right now I was not here. I was in jail. And it was organized definitely by a local administration and so on. But after huge media attention to our case, when I used lawyers and so on, there was big wave of complaints and so on. They just stopped to push us. That is why usually local administration play better role. And actually, there is huge level of corruption, and through our investigations, through our campaign, it's visible. That's huge corruption.
Kay, do you want to add to that? You made a very nice comment yesterday about the interplay between central government and regional government.
I think it's really important to remember that local government officials are not elected. They're chosen. And so there's this environment and kind of hierarchy of fear. So if you're the regional, Akeem or mayor in the village where all of this is happening, you're not making decisions. You're answering to the guy above you, you who's answering to the guy above him, who's answering to the president. So there's it's sort of this really classic kind of authoritarian structure where nobody wants to step out of line. Nobody wants to be the guy who took the risk. And so if you can show that in your fiefdom, you're really hard on the bad guy, whoever the bad guy is, you're going to get ahead. And there also are very, as Sergey mentioned, there are very, very strong connections between corruption between authorities and corporations. When we first started working in Beryozovka, for example, the mayor had a car, a very fancy car, from the corporation, from the oil company that was working there, where he was also part-time. And when we asked him about it, he saw absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that he was both the mayor and the employee of the corporation and had this really snazzy car that he'd have to work 5 lifetimes to have been able to afford himself. But he didn't see he didn't see there was anything wrong with that.
And answering about what happened in Krasnodar Krai, for us it's clear. It's all this activity against the Wakhta was organized by a not local administration, first of all, local chapter of FSB, Federal Security Service.
And let me share the experience from Azerbaijan in the context of the local governance. At least 3 main differences between the Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. As you know, Azerbaijan is tiny. It's the size like the Minnesota state, Austria in the Europe. And the local governance has the less power, also strongly depend on the central government. And another difference is the extractive industry in my country mostly concentrate in the capital city because Azerbaijan focuses on the oil and the gas in the Caspian Sea. And the second, social media. Social media is playing more influential and is playing a more important role for the disseminate the information and became more popular among the society. And it's easy to disseminate all of the information. There is no control. The YouTube channel and a lot of YouTube channel translated from the Europe and the United States focus on the domestic station in Azerbaijan, and every month became more popular. Every month visitors is going up because the official the channel and the official newspaper and the official TV channel in my country, they produce only fake information. Nobody is believe that. That's why most of the population prefer to use the social network. In Facebook also very popular. And the foreigners, and most of the foreigners leave Azerbaijan during the last 5 years. I mean in the NGO sector, in the foreign NGO sector. And due to the prohibition, the operation foreign organization, donor organization without the registration. According to the new legislation was adopted 2013, all of the foreign NGO require registration by the Minister of Justice, and before registration, they should justify their program and their project in front of the Minister of Finance. As you see, the multiple filter for them. That's why they prefer to close the office and left Azerbaijan. And only some the leading organization, international financial institution, World Bank, ABRD, ADB, and also EU delegation and the diplomatic corps operated in my country.
If I could just say one more thing about the issue of foreigners. I think it's really important to not underestimate the power of propaganda. And you know, the whole issue around Ukraine. I've been heard many times, especially in Krasnodar Krai, which is very close to Crimea, very close to the border where all of this is happening. Many quite educated people believe that because it's been on Russian television, that the Russians are in Ukraine because the Americans invaded. And so this is perceived as a defensive mechanism by a lot of people and a lot of folks who are very, very close there. I mean, the thing that I always say is imagine if the only source of news that we had in the United States was Fox News, the only source. And we had to listen to it all the time. And imagine what your perception would be of Russia, of the world, of China, of reality. And that's very similar, I think, to what we're talking about when we think that, the majority of Russians are still getting their news from television, from official Russian state TV. Yeah.
I will add first on the social media. Of course, it's really changing the environment for the activities of environmental defenders. In the past, in the beginning of 2000s, we were able to win a global, nationwide campaign against the anti-nuclear campaign that time, just because there was the assistance from our colleagues, and they help us to establish contacts with Guardian, BBC, and then it was helpful for them, for us, because you would expect us, of course, in the case of absence of independent media, the government or the companies will use the media, traditional mass media, against you. They will make you the public image of freaks or hipsters and something, that's to show you in negative context, not to be supported by the community. Of course, with social media, we can make our own image and to disseminate information on ourselves and to try to explain what we're trying to achieve from a particular campaign. And my NGO is very advanced in using social media, and our website, maybe it's still a small audience in comparison with mass media, traditional mass media, but it's as environmental media, it's the most popular in Central Asia. and we are trying to use it. In some cases, it's inspiring some journalists to join our campaign, like it happened in recent campaign. We gained one, but it was completely, the information support was by our media and the journalists who joined our campaign, and at the end, no media were, or decent media were in support of the proponents of the construction of a ski resort nearby my city. But I think the social media, it's even bigger issue in our countries. In the absence of independent media, I think there is a big hidden conflict between generations, because the mass media, especially TV, is for aged persons. They're always watching only TV, but the young generation, for them, the source of information is social media. And they do not understand each other, and the government, because they are representing the older generation, they are afraid of what is going on. This generation is completely out of control, because they can invest huge money into the traditional mass media, but no effect. Yeah, no propaganda is reaching the audience which they are aiming for. And then the struggling of against the pollution, yes, of course, traditionally in some industrial cities, it's a big issue. Just recently, there was a massive campaign in one of the cities to prevent the construction of the incineration of persistent organic pollutants. But what is new phenomenon? That's in some city, in our city, we have the system of Hydromet who are monitoring the air pollution, but they do not publish the information in real time. And people want to know what the quality of the air today, not the week ago or months ago. And then one person just started to put his own system of monitoring of the PM 2.5. And all the people, they are paying attention and following the monitoring data from his website, not the publication from the Hydromet paid and receiving huge money from the government. That's what's changing. And so it's the private persons are able to compete with the huge monitoring system paid by the government. That's
it's a good example.
And my question, I don't know if I'm trying to phrase this as a question, but I'm wondering about the role of social norms and legal norms. So comparing what's going on in the former Soviet space in the United States, because I feel like especially the laws about public gatherings would be very challenging or impossible to have in the United States. And thinking about that kind of the difference in those cultures and how that might change the development of these kind of reprisal systems.
I'll address different questions. First, let me thank you all. This fabulous, fascinating presentation. My questions are twofold. One, especially aimed at Mr. Nee, is whether or not you believe, a very naive question, but the emergence of the less, I don't know what the word is, but the milder sort of general news social media. I'm thinking especially of, for example, vlast.kz, which has a lot of information about environment. Do these sort of middle of the road organizations have any impact, or are you coordinating with them at all? Second question is, do you have at the rayon level in Kazakhstan an inventory of environmental damages and when they took place? Because if you do, your country has amazing health data by year from 2000 at the rayon level, and so one can actually look at the effect of these various disasters.
I just want to talk about the Zelensky phenomenon. President Zelensky, when they were having parliamentary elections, he comes from a city called Kryvyi Rih, which is probably the most polluted city in Ukraine, and has a huge investment by ArcelorMittal. And he created kind of a sudden inspection of that plant right before the parliamentary elections. And he was accused of eco-populism by the company manager and then by the American Chamber of Commerce. But then ArcelorMittal, in about 3 or 4 weeks, said that they were going to invest $1.5 billion into pollution controls. And I actually talked with some people on Skype from that city. You know, the water in the water taps runs brown because it's so steel, you know, it's so steely. And, you know, you feel totally inadequate if you don't have a filter system in your house, and not everybody can afford one. I mean, what do you think of, you know, we talked about foreign agents here, right? But what about indigenous agents? And, you know, he is a master user of YouTube. You know, he made money on his campaign, even, you know, by, you know, and mobilizing that. And obviously, with climate change, there's going to be, you know, if you look at the maps of, you know, the Aral Sea is going to get much bigger. The Caspian Sea is going to be much bigger. Baku is going to be underwater or going to have more problems. I mean, you know, how do you play that scenario, and how do you mobilize you know, internally?
Can you just introduce yourself?
My name is Boden Orishkevich.
Okay, and this is Charlie Becker back there, yeah, so people know.
All right, well, can I first address the first question? The laws on public assembly that happened in Russia and then so effortlessly were adopted in other Central Asian countries. Well, you need to keep in mind that this is happening in a very in authoritarian regimes where laws do not get contested much at all by quasi-parliaments, by media. There is the role of a Supreme Court that we have back in our region is very, very nominal. Even though in some countries we have some sort of a Supreme Court, they just sit there, not doing the work. There is not truly a division of power right there. So going back to so these are the settings where these laws get adopted. And if you are concerned about something like this happening in the United States, you just need to be aware and to, you know, to do everything to keep your media independent and to keep your Supreme Court as much as independent as it can be. Unfortunately, we see some really concerning trends in the United States in the recent years. So we saw that for the last 30 years happening in Central Asia and in Russia, and we are really aware of these trends. And if you can have one takeaway from this gathering is to be on the lookout of things like that, little things, step by step, things happening in the States as well.
If I could just add one comment on that. I mean, I think if you've been following the news, there is a proposal that has been put forward to say that if you're going to demonstrate, if an organization is going to demonstrate on national park land, like the mall in Washington, D.C., you'll need to pay. Who can afford to pay to demonstrate on the National Mall? I mean, we all know where that is going. So again, as Lana said, we need to be vigilant. We need to pay attention. We need to not take our democracy for granted, and we need to stand up in the way that the defenders in this book stand up to protect what we value. And if that's something that we value, we need to protect it.
First, I would like to mention that I was very surprised in the morning by students now, the university professor, how you are knowledgeable of the situation in my country and the challenges, the specific challenges which are important. We saw that it's important for our environmentalists in the countries. The first about the influence of the environmental information, its importance for social media and new media. Yes, maybe we are changing. It's a number of factors we're changing, but even the traditional media, they see that they're more and more interested in environmental information, and last is they are very advanced and they're trying to talk to their audience. That is what makes them different to the other media. And not only on the environment, but from time to time they had some meetings to discuss with us environmental issues or some international relations issues, maybe some other issues as well. And still it's a small audience, but they should have, it's like that's the product which is needed for some group of clients, and they should have on their on their stores, let's say information stores, And then next one is inventory on environmental damages. No, unfortunately, it's a big challenge for us. Now the government is drafting this new edition of Environmental Code. It's the most challenging issue for me as a lawyer. I'm struggling with the business association. What they're trying to do. They're trying to reduce their environmental liability and the pollutant pays principle to the liability for the damage to the environment, not to environmental to the human health or lives. They just deleted the words of human health and life from all the relevant provisions of the environmental code. I try to include them again, and seems to be they deleted again from the environmental code. I'll try to continue that struggle for environmental rights in the parliament, but not so optimistic about it. And then the working with environmental information, social media. There are, of course, some interest that there's some periods when the hot issue, something like Greta Thunberg speech in the UN General Assembly, or at the end of our campaign against the government. But then, of course, you have regular audience, which is smaller, but some period of time, there's a big interest to one specific issue. And of course, it's a challenge for us. We're trying not to, to be popular just on hypes, making hypes. That's for us. It's important that to raise the environmental awareness. It takes time. We should be, more advanced than traditional mass media. We're trying to attract more audience by using the visualization, by using cartoons, comics, new sources of information, but trying not. There is a compromise in our team that we will try not to use hypes as a source of attending to approach the audience, to attract the audience, because it's not the regular audience which will read every day or at least weekly our information.
And coming back to your question about EcoBastus and so on, yes, of course, we are familiar with the situation in Ukraine and this order and so on. Some people consider it's eco-populism and it's supported by some media and so on and so on. But if you look at the reality of EcoBastus plant and so on, EcoBastus plant, because there is same consortium metal steel. Actually, there are a lot of plans on paper to protect environment. In reality, nothing to do in EcoBastus. Why that is why local people, some of active local people decided to protect ourselves, own family and so on, just to distribute information and so on. There is horrible, completely horrible situation. How long it will exist? Actually, I don't know, because everything will depend from us. For example, during his presentation, Vadim mentioned very excellent case about Pavlodar. Pavlodar is another very polluted city in Kazakhstan. When officials, together with private business, tried to organize construction new incinerator, there was huge wave of protection. And officials were completely afraid and just stopped this initiative and just remove this business and just discussion. If there is happen in Temirtau, I'm sure there will be huge pressure on metal steel and so on, just improve situation. Because for specialists, it's clear situation. Look at metal steel in, for example, in Australia. The same plant, but they use very advanced air pollution control system, better air control and so on. Why you don't do the same in Temirtau? Because it's cheaper. When just provide some bribe to local officials, to some central bodies and so on. And it's clear history that even family of our president is connected to this plant, it is all. That is why just only political will and corruption. It's answer to your question.
Well, can I add to that, to your question about Ukraine? In our report, we cover violence and harassment, and we cover 3 murders.
Yeah.
And in all of the countries we talked about, all the murders of environmental activists, they all happened in Ukraine. And all the, we have Ekaterina Gandyuk, we have Nikolai Bychko, and we have Nikolai Yeroma. These are all the people
Humanities.
who were, huh?
The last one is very, the first one you mentioned is very famous.
Yes,
Yeah, very
Ekaterina
famous.
Gandyuk, yeah.
very
Yes,
famous.
because she was a victim of an acid attack. All these people and other Ukrainian activists who faced violence, who were featured in our report, they all face that from corporations, not from the government, like in Russia and Central Asia, but from businesses, from corporations. And yes, Ukraine is going through some sort of the political revival now. They don't have this violent, stifling laws, but also government is very, very passive in taking action to investigate this particular cases, and just the government is very passive in putting some system in place to protect environmental defenders. So this is the role of the government there to act on this. Yeah.
I want to add, my point is that it's very important to have the independent justice and the court system. All of the country suffered lack of the independent court system.
There is no independent court system.
And all of the 3 countries, they sign mainly the UN Convention, internationally recognized convention. And they also adopted the comprehensive the legislation, social norm, legal norm. But the problem is the rule of the law. The problem is the rule of the law. This is main problem. Despite the past almost 28-year collapse of the Soviet Union, but still the court and the justice system under the control of the executive government, under control of the present administration. It's the main problem for everybody, for business, for ordinary citizens, for environmental defenders and the human rights defenders. Everybody suffered from the dependence of the court system.
Okay, with that, since we're over time, I'm going to thank you again for taking the time to be with us and talking about your work, and all the power to you. Yes. And this is really, they're launching, hold up the report, Elena. Or their new report on environmental defenders.
And there's copies in the corner if
Yes.
you want one.
Please take. They don't need to carry
Don't
them
carry
back.
them back.
And anyone who wants to come and chat, please,